In September of 2023, we had the chance to visit Brooks Falls in Katmai National Park. We entered the lottery for several years in a row to stay at the Brooks Lodge before we were finally selected. We chose to fly Alaska Airlines into King Salmon and then Branch River Air into Katmai. We first had a layover in Seattle, and then we spent a night in Anchorage before boarding our flight to King Salmon. Upon landing in King Salmon, Branch River Air was there to pick us up, and they took us in their shuttle to their docks along the river. There was a little bit of paperwork, a check of weights, ourselves as well as the gear, and then we loaded the plane for Katmai. It was the first time for all of us being in a float plane, so the flight itself was a bit of an adventure. The weather was a little rough, but we were still able to take off. The water shuttle was canceled for the day, which often happens, so we were glad we chose to fly. The flight to Brooks Camp from King Salmon is less than a half an hour, and you get to see some of the landscape as you are approaching the park. Although with the stormy weather, we were not able to see quite as much. We had great views on our return flight though. I want to include this little bit of footage of the water taxi from a different day, just so you can see what it looks like in case you choose to go that route. Upon landing, you are required to go to Bear School before you can do anything else. Bear School is located in the visitor center on the beach just above where you land. There's a storage building across from the lodge where you can leave your supplies while you wait for your flights.
To each other. And they do this so they can feast on the all-you-can-catch.
After we finished Bear School, we headed over to the main lodge to get the key to our cabin. Brooks Lodge is actually a complex of buildings, including several single-room cabins, as well as a larger building that has several rooms in it. The basic size and layout of the rooms is similar no matter which option you receive. There is a set of bunk beds on each side of the room, a small table. There is a shower, a sink, and a toilet. There is also a heater and some electrical outlets. There is only a curtain on a rope to provide some privacy in the cabin, so I would make sure you are comfortable with your traveling companions if you are going to share a room. If you don't stay in the Brooks Lodge, your only other option to stay overnight is to camp. There is a campground about a quarter of a mile or so from the main lodge area. It is surrounded by an electric fence. There are toilets there, and there is also a storage area for your food and gear that you're required to use. There are also designated areas to cook and eat. Food is only allowed in these designated areas or inside of buildings. If you want to do the hike to Dumpling Mountain, it also leaves from this area. The housing for the seasonal workers is between the main lodge and the campground. There is also an amphitheater in this area where ranger-led presentations are given. When you are ready to go look for the bears, there is a bridge that goes across the Brooks River with several observation decks built in. There are locking gates on both ends of the bridge to keep the bears out. That doesn't mean there may not be bears lingering, however, and sometimes this can cause a delay if you have to wait for them to leave. Once you leave the bridge, you are on the road that runs between the Brooks Lodge and the National Park buildings on Lake Brooks. You will eventually see some toilets and the sign for Brooks Falls, and this is the trail you want to take to view the bears at the falls. Or you can keep going along the road to Lake Brooks. This road is also the start of the Valley of 10,000 Smokes if you choose to take that tour. The hike to the falls is over a mile, so it is easy to put on a lot of miles every day as you go back and forth to the viewing areas. Our first close encounter with the bears came right at this spot where the trail goes off to the Brooks Falls. This mother, with her 3 cubs, was walking down the road right towards us. I had just a few moments to grab a little bit of video and a couple of photographs before I got off the road to give the bears some space to pass. We then headed down the trail to the falls. It is a well-maintained trail that goes through the forest, and eventually you come to a boardwalk with a gate very similar to the bridge. Keep a lookout as you are walking through this raised area, as we often were able to see bears sleeping in the forest just off the trail below us. Eventually you come to a covered area known as the treehouse. This is the area where the trail forks to either go to the Riffles platform or onto the Falls platform. This area also has some informational materials, benches, and it serves as the staging area during busier times for those waiting a turn at the platforms. Luckily, when we were there, the crowds were small and that was never an issue. We chose to first take a look from the Riffles platform. This view, while further away from the falls, gives you a wider perspective of the falls and kind of a head-on view of the action. Sometimes there were bears in the riffles not far from the platform. So it is a great viewing area and is usually less crowded. And then of course it was time to go to the most popular viewing area, and that is the platform right at Brooks Falls. It is an awesome sight to see such large bears so close on the falls right in front of you. It was common to see the bears changing positions around the falls, depending on which bear was more dominant. This bear had a pretty good gash in the back of its leg. I would have to assume from fighting with other bears. We were in Katmai between salmon runs. It was a cold spring, so the runs were running a little late this year. There were a few silver salmon just starting to go up the river, and the sockeyes were just finished. As a result, we didn't see any bears actually catch any fish on the falls. But those fishing at the base of the falls were doing better. And don't forget to look downstream from the falls as well. There were often bears fishing in the riffles. As I mentioned, the sockeye salmon run was over, so the fish that were still alive but on their last breaths were congregating closer to the bridge. As a result, we actually saw more bears in this area than we did at the falls. The bears would often use a method called snorkeling to catch these dying fish. They would swim with their heads underwater and find an easy fish to catch. Besides fish, we often saw bears eating grass, and I even saw some bears eating mud as well. I later learned this is because the mud has a lot of minerals in it because of the volcanic ash that once covered the area. From the platforms on the bridge, I was able to watch this mother and cub come from all the way upriver and eventually pass in front of us. I was able to anticipate where I thought they were going to go, so I was set up ahead of them and was rewarded with one of my favorite moments with the bears, watching this cub nurse with its mother. The cub was very unhappy when its mother finally got up and made it stop nursing. We saw these three adolescent bears a lot, and even if you didn't see them, you could often hear them carrying on and fighting over fish. I believe it was sibling bears and their aunt, if I am remembering correctly. You never knew where you might see bears. This big guy came out of nowhere walking down the service road. We saw bears along the lake shores several times, like this mother and three cubs. They eventually ended up down by the campground where they came very close to these people on the beach. We would often see bears very close to the fishermen in these areas as well. Sometimes the fishermen would get a little too close to the bears and the park rangers would give them a warning. On multiple occasions, we saw bears right outside of our cabin door. I filmed this from inside our cabin. You can also see the corners of the buildings are almost all chewed on by the bears. Another area to explore is Lake Brooks. There are national park buildings in this area, as well as some toilets and a covered picnic area. We saw a long trail of bear prints in the black sand on the beach of the lake. We had this close encounter with this large bear shortly before we got to the lake, so it may have been the one that created the tracks. While we were in Katmai, we also decided to go on a ranger-led walk to learn about the native cultures that used to inhabit this area. They had a recreation of what they thought their dwellings may have looked like inside of an enclosed building. He also pointed out some of the plants along the way, including this monk's hood, which is very poisonous, so if you see it, leave it alone. On our last morning, my sister decided to hike up Dumpling Mountain. She was nice enough to let me use these pictures from her hike. Our last morning was the only time we had a clear enough sky to be able to see, or I probably would have done the hike myself at some point during our visit. There are great vistas of the whole area from up on top of the mountain. There are also a lot of bears in this area as well. And then, all too soon, it was time to leave. We boarded our float plane for the flight back to King Salmon. The weather was much better than when we flew in, so the flight was much smoother and we had better views of the landscapes. We spent a little time in the King Salmon Airport waiting for our flight back to Anchorage, and then it was back home. Almost as soon as we left, I was already having thoughts about hoping to return to this amazing place someday. If you are interested in learning more about our trip to Brooks Falls and Katmai National Park, please check the description below for a link to my blog. There I have many more pictures posted, as well as some detailed information about our stay and travel in and out of Katmai. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.